Greetings. Welcome to the How We Do Digital Ministry podcast. I'm Christopher Harris, founder of Faith Growth. You can find us online at faithgrowth.com, where we help church communities engage their members online. And lots of other fun stuff we'll tell you more about at the end. On this podcast, I have a conversation with a church leader and ask them to share how they do digital ministry in their community. Today, I am talking with Bishop Megan Rohrer. Bishop Megan, please introduce yourself and tell us how you do digital ministry.
I'm Bishop Megan Rohrer, and I am on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and do a lot of live streams. I've been doing online Bible study for a little more than 15 years. Exciting.
That was one of the reasons that I was really excited to have you on the podcast, because you have an experience of digital ministry that is not just, it's pre-pandemic, and you've done some exciting things there. So I hope we'll get into all that here shortly. One of my favorite questions that I like to begin with is just, can you share with us a time or an instance where you've seen God at work online or encountered God online?
Yeah, I think the number of pastoral care questions that people offer up online, whether it's through a Zoom conversation or through direct messages, is really equivalent and a lot of the same stuff as in-person ministry. And so there are folk who want to share about grief because they lost a spouse, or who want to learn how to pray, or want to learn more about how they can become a faithful person, or even questions about the catechism. And so a lot of it is exactly the same. Some of it is slightly different because you can meet people who are from all over the world. And that means that folk who didn't know that someone like you existed can find you online or find theology like yours online. I think one of the things that has touched my heart quite a bit about why I continue doing online ministry is because there are people who are able to get communion or be baptized in person, but they're not able to hear a sermon that speaks lovingly about their life or their family. And so there are a number of people who will go to in-person church and then go to a second online service in order to hear what they would describe as good news. And so I think there are a lot of people who are hungry for God's love translated in a new way, but particularly in a way where they don't have to do mental gymnastics to understand how love actually is love, and not dividing or separating. And so it's for me something that feels profoundly important, because there is a whole group of people who, that song "Jesus Loves Me" isn't sung to them.
I like that. I kind of forget about that sometimes, that, I'm online so much, going to the first part of your answer about the pastoral care coming in, and I forget that, honestly, that would be easier for me in a lot of situations to seek pastoral care that way. And I'm glad that they're able to find you and engage in that conversation. The other thing that I like is kind of that second piece, finding that, the good news for them. And I think this is, something, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about digital ministry, and especially coming out of the ELCA and the Lutheran tradition, is I think we have a message that speaks well into our current world. And the digital really empowers that to get into people that, that the way that God has revealed this to us is a message of grace and acceptance to them, as opposed to, you're on the outside. So that's a real positive as well. Positive. That's, to me, that's exciting, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of people for whom having a pastor over to their house for pastoral care is a lot of work, because that means for them that they have to clean their house even more than they would if their grandma was coming. And so some people, if you're not feeling well, but you want the pastor to visit you and provide care for you, you don't always have the energy or the desire to host someone at your house in order to make that happen. And so online ministry can be really helpful, because in the way that I'm speaking to you now from a hotel room after a long meeting, and then I'm going to drive to another place. So we can have this meeting without you having to clean your whole house. You can just pick a wall that looks nice. Who knows? I'm sure the rest of your house is immaculately clean, right? But I have a 7 and 8 year old, so my house isn't always. And so I just think there's something really beautiful about being able to choose your background and to really focus on the pastoral conversation that needs to happen and not have people stress out or worry that their life has to be perfect before they talk to a pastor or a faith leader.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, literally kind of right where you're at this moment in time, which is really good. So tell me like you mentioned earlier, you've been doing online Bible study for 15 years. And, before you became bishop, what were some of the digital initiatives that you were doing in the church that you served at the time?
Yeah, so we had something called Bible Study That Doesn't Suck, which, spoiler alert, it's the exact same Bible study. It's just online, and the title was to like grab people's attention. We did online book studies where people would talk about the same book. We would do full-on live worships that were live streamed, and for a long time, the live stream of the regular kind of Sunday morning worships, we would have conversations with new and interesting people for a year. Every Thursday, I would have a conversation with people who have diverse backgrounds. And so we would have conversations about race and class and faith and, what Bible studies inspire folk who are very different. And so we could have conversations with people kind of around the world about just the way that they see the world, the way that God is speaking to them. I've done things like just putting up an inspirational quote, writing it on a Post-it note, taking a picture of it and putting it online, kind of with the idea that, maybe not everything you post on social media needs to be like super fancy created, and that for me, like using something like a Post-it note, if that's what most people are going to see in their daily life or use around their house or in their work experience, I want them to connect some of the sacred thoughts that they might have about God with some of the ordinary items that are always around them, rather than just thinking God comes with a special incense smell or a special cloth on an altar, that God is in those spaces too. And so it's basically anything that kind of sparks my creativity at a given time. I've done I'll write theology notes on napkins from different restaurants, like if I have an idea, and then just take a picture of it. And my kids have a video series they like to do called The Kiddom of God, where they just talk about their idea of where God is in the world. And it's a little bit sillier and more fun, and some people like that. Over the pandemic, we did a series of competitions where the kids would compete against each other, doing just really zany things, kind of as a way to I'm kind of like all the stuff you would do in a youth group, but from home, and like just silly things parents could do to occupy their kids. Some of them faithful, some of them just silly, like to see who could try to eat a 2-pound gummy unicorn the fastest, and things like that. They made their own nativity out of Play-Doh, and so just to see them illustrate different stories of the Bible, but know that they're doing it in a way that's intended to like entertain other people who, when folk are really honest about it, like not everyone reads the Bible or has memorized it as much as they think they may ought to. And so to hear kids explain different concepts or to have things at their level is educational to everyone, because then they don't feel like they're less of a Christian because they're getting things answered. And there was a study that used to be true, I don't know if it's still true, that more people listen to the children's sermon than the adult sermon because it's easier to understand. And so I think that's true about digital ministry as well, is that people like it when it's stuff, the same stuff that makes young kids understand the Bible is stuff that adults appreciate as well.
I was thinking that same thing about the children's sermon when you were saying that. I was like, oh yeah. I would guess that's still true. Not sure. But I mean, so you've been, well, there's a couple things I wanted to point out, or just I'll uplift to our audience. Well, number one, when you're saying make it ordinary with the Post-it notes, the other flip side of that is doesn't require any special tools, like you're not having to learn Canva or some illustration program. It's literally just write it and take a picture. Yeah. So that's easy for those that don't know those tools. But then so that is kind of my other question. You've tried a lot, and I talk with some church leaders, and they want to be more online, doing more online and connecting online, but they're sometimes just not sure where to get started, or, either it's the technology or what would I do, gets in the way. How have you just, it sounds like you've just kind of cultivated, I have an idea, let's just try it and go for it. How has that worked in your mind? And, and how, what approach should others take just to kind of get out there and try things and see what works, I guess? I don't know if that was a good question.
And maybe as a bishop is that it's not my job to do things perfectly, because if I'm able to do things perfectly, no one ever has to volunteer to help to do anything. So it's my job to do things imperfectly, just enough so that other people feel like they could try, and just enough so that other people will feel like they might be smarter than me and able to do it better. And that's an age-old pastor trick. I think it worked for Jesus too. Where you basically just want to not it. If it was perfect, then maybe God's perfect. And so I have actually found I've had a lot of really expensive tech equipment over the years, and lots of expensive programs. And what I have found is that when I bring a fancy camera to try to interview someone about their faith, they stutter, and they're nervous, and they hate it, and they think they looked terrible, and the end result is not good most of the time, unless people practice a lot of times, or they're competent, like they're more of an actor or a performer. But if I want to have content that's actually my grandma, or just regular ordinary people in the church, that the more simple I make the technology, people still need to be able to hear it, right? So that's kind of the bare minimum, is you got to have good audio. But more people are willing to say yes to being a part of a video thing if I'm recording them on an iPhone than if I have a giant camera. Yeah. And that, I think, the more you make it the way you would record your home family movie, or the way that make it less of a big deal. If you are only doing one video a year, then everyone's got to be perfect in it. But if you do them every week, and you're don't worry, people are going to only watch this on Monday, and then they're going to move on to something funny, Ellen did, whatever, right?
Yeah.
If you're doing them regularly, people understand that it's not the only content that's going to come from your ministry space, but it's just one of the pieces of content. And so I think it becomes a little bit more approachable if you just start doing it regularly. And honestly, it's only because I did it for so long that people have forgotten how terrible it was in the beginning. And the blessing is that the technology you're using today, it's all those church people, think how much time they put into their VHS tape recordings, right? And they edit, and they're wonderful. And we can't even watch them anymore because most people don't have VHS. So have it be okay to screw up and for it not to be perfect, because in 10 years, nobody's going to be watching even whatever this social media is that you're using. So just make it for today. Make it good enough to be this, the sermon, right? If you do it in person and then it's over, there's no take backs. So it doesn't mean make it so terrible that nobody is able to watch it, but just try and see what happens, or commit to doing it one day for a week.
I like that.
And you don't have to post all 7 of them, but just only post the one that's better.
Well, I think you said a couple important things in there. First is, it's kind of like a muscle. You got to exercise it a little bit. It will get better with more, even with this podcast, Yeah, I'm a tech person who loves to play with toys, and there's other services besides Zoom, but I was like, at the end of the day, it would have taken me longer to get all that set up, and I finally just had to say, let's go. Um,
Yeah.
and we're getting better week by week as we put this thing out. And so at some point you just kind of have to start and learn along the way, and keeping it simple. I like some good lessons in there. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah. Let's transition a little bit from your pastoral role, pre-bishop, to kind of your bishop role now, working with serving many churches and serving, and helping them. Well, I mean, there's kind of two things I want to talk about. First is, like, how do you see your role as bishop played out online? And sharing some of the things, because I've seen you share, just like all bishops, you're driving from church to church and visiting and everything. So I see, and like you said, you're in a hotel for a meeting this morning. And I kind of enjoy that behind the scenes and what's going on at the synod level. How do you see that role, and how do you want to continue that, as you serve as bishop?
Yeah, I think there's, maybe the way to think about that is like, there's different audiences for different messages, right? And so when I'm doing something that's online, I have to assume that it's anyone in the world could watch it. And so I speak and talk in very different ways. There might be like private conversations on Zoom, but still, even then, like even if it's, sold to me as a student conversation, all of a sudden, at some point, the president of the school shows up, right? Like, and so you just have to kind of assume any online is kind of a global audience. Things that you do in person are more for that one group of people for that day. And assume that if you are consistently trying to be as authentic as possible and trying to just be yourself, that people will forgive you for the time you said the word wrong, or the message that was, slight close to what you meant, but not quite there. And that people kind of, through your consistency, will be able to kind of see who you are and who your character is. And so I think there has been a fear that I think some Christians have had, because there's so many great Bible texts about humility, that maybe we shouldn't like talk about ourselves or do selfies or do things like that. And what that has meant is that the Christians who are the angriest tend to be the ones who are out there on the front lines, like on the news and with big billboards. And then that changes the conversation, where people don't see the full diversity of all the many, many different ways that people are following Jesus or are being faithful in the world. And so just know that the more you're able to kind of have a public presence, the more you're able to kind of shine a light on the many different ways that it's possible to be faithful. And that in and of itself sort of changes the world, because there are other people who didn't know they could believe similar things as you. And I think that's part of the challenge and the difficulty is there's like 1,000 podcasts and there's 1,000 church live streams. But I think if you just keep kind of consistently being who you are, every once in a while you can have a fun gimmick. But like, if you just keep being who you are, I think it will resonate with other people who need to hear the good news in that kind of way.
Thank you. So tell me about, kind of, as you are traveling around and seeing the churches, and visiting the churches in your synod, what are you seeing is some of the trends? How are they doing digital ministry, I guess, and what are some of the trends there, and what are some of your hope for the future of how online and digital will be able to help the local parish?
Yeah, I see it in extremes, right? So there are some people who have every piece of technology. They have a whole suite of like materials that help them kind of do the live stream, and they're very produced. And then there's the people who are like entirely not produced at all. They just put an iPad up and they just push record, and it's good enough and it's out there. And I think so that's the like maybe that's the good news, is that you can occupy a space regardless of like how little or how much work you put into it. I think there are a lot of people who are interested in helping their rural congregations grow younger, and so they're trying to find ways that they can like put information online. And this is the big tip I want to say, as someone who travels from church to church. Maybe more often I get to see more of the content that people put out and kind of think of it with like new member eyes, because I'm trying to figure out like, what's the address of the place and what time is their service? Are they in person right now, or are they only online? And if they are online, how do I get to that online service? And so congregations, put what time your worship is on everything. Put it on your website and your Facebook and your Twitter. Like, make it the first sentence is what time, what days your worship is. And when it's different on Facebook than on Twitter, because no one remembers the Twitter password anymore, just make it really clear which of the times you worship are the times to worship. There are some people who don't think anyone ever comes to church because of a website or because of social media stuff. And those are the congregations that are the ones who haven't had a visitor in a long time, right? Because there's no yellow pages anymore. And so there needs to be a way for people to visit you in person or to know when you're going to be online. And so if you're going to be posting a podcast every week or a worship service every week, make it an event on social media where it puts an announcement in a calendar up and it tells people when it's going to play. Because otherwise people will just spend 5 minutes looking for what time you're going to post your stuff and then move on to the congregation that made it really obvious what time it's going to happen.
Why? Yeah, it amazes me how we don't make it easy when it is easy to make it easy, I guess.
Well, a lot of people are doing digital content for the people they already know.
Yeah.
And that's wonderful to be able to include shut-ins and folk who aren't able to come to church right now because of the life choices that they're making or because of busyness. But your live stream and your social media isn't just for your cousins to be able to watch the same church service as you. It's for people like who are busy and they have been to churches before where they were made to feel not welcome, and they want to watch your service online, or they want to hear the sermon online before they come to your physical space, because they will feel very guilty if they need to walk out partway through the service because things are rude or mean or inconsistent. And so if you're the kind of congregation who genuinely is trying to love people, which I have to assume you are, if you've listened this far into the podcast, right? That making your services online is kind of like the grocery store telling you what's on sale that weekend, right? Like, you want to know if they're going to have Rice Krispies before you drive all the way across town to the grocery store, if the only thing you're going to do this week is make Rice Krispie bars. And so that's what people are looking for. They want to know, if they want to look at your live stream of worship to know if they have to dress up or not to come to your church. They want to know if there are cushions on the pews, right? They want to know if the service actually starts at the time that it starts, right? Or if there is a time in the service they're going to have to commit to something. They want to know if there's one offering or more than one offering, right? So people are just looking for information so they can participate fully in your church service with less anxiety. And the more opportunities you give them to answer those questions, the more they're going to be able to focus on God when they're at your space than worry if they should have worn blue jeans or not.
No, I love that. And it kind of, like, one of the things that I like to tell churches along that same line is, like, where getting online earlier helps us is, like, before you did anything online, it was like they always had to come to us, and that's a high threshold. And we didn't even know that they existed in our world until they actually showed up. But realistically, they probably were driving by for 6 months, 8 months, and we're thinking, hey, I would like to check out this church. It's close, or my friend told me something good. But now we have the opportunity to start connecting in that 6 to 2 years, even 6 months to 2 years before they might even darken our door. online, and through some calls to action, maybe even get an email address and ask them if there's ways we can pray for them. We can start the relationship in small ways, much earlier. And these individuals are coming into our world, and before, they didn't come into our world until they stepped a foot in the door, which, everything you just described, that's a hard ask, and there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of things, from I got to get the kids dressed on Sunday morning if you have kids, and that can make it hard to get somewhere at a particular time. Anyways, to me, that's what's exciting, is I think we can start the relationship much earlier now.
Yeah. I also think, why wouldn't you want people who are going to contribute to your offering?
Yeah.
Why would you want extra people who are going to pray for you? Why wouldn't you want those things? And I think I think people don't ask enough for people to donate. I think it's because of fear of what it felt like when televangelists did it on TV, and ways that it wasn't clear if the money was being used for good things. But there's a lot, right now, if people donate to your church or your nonprofit on Facebook, there are 0 credit card fees. There's no other way for someone to donate with their credit card that has 0 fees.
Exactly.
Why wouldn't you want to ask for people to give their offering online, and have no overhead expense to ask somebody to donate to your congregation? Of course you should do that.
Well, and I think that, I agree. I think it is, the hesitation goes back to the televangelist, but I think we also forget that, the ask, when you're actually passing a plate around, it's nonverbal, but it's a huge ask. You're literally physically putting something in somebody's hand, and they have to make this decision whether or not to give or pass it on. And, that's what our experience, at least pre-pandemic, was on Sunday morning. It was a huge ask, when we passed that plate around, and we need to find something equivalent when we're doing it online, because I think you're right. We're not asking enough, and it has to be done different. We're not passing a plate. So it's not just, and if you want to give, here's the link. It's now go give right now, give now. Probably not that direct, but I'm sorry, go.
Under 30 don't carry cash. So even if you pass them an offering plate, they're not going to put anything in it. They don't have anything to put in it. They don't write checks, right? So if you don't have a Venmo link or a PayPal link or a way that they can, they even have those little machines where they can just swipe their credit card under and it deducts $25 or whatever the amount is. There's a whole group of people that, it would be as if you were well, we only take Spanish silver dollars in our church. Nobody would do that. And so, as the world moves and changes, stop being an only VHS church.
I like that. Stop being an only VHS church. That is a good one. All right. So Bishop, we are almost out of time. So I'm going to give you one last question. And just as the church is moving more and more online, what is one piece of advice that you would offer for other church leaders?
Just push print sometimes, and just push publish sometimes. It's not done yet, but then it's in the world and you can try the next thing. Be willing to get feedback, and when someone says, it looks like you don't know what you're doing, you can say, yes, I don't know what I'm doing and I need help, right? Be willing to put stuff in the world. So much of what I hear from pastors and lay leaders is they feel like their content is not good enough. And I think it's never going to be good enough if you don't put it out there sometimes. Jesus had some strange parables and some parables that are really wonderful. Most of us just preach about the parables that make a lot of sense and are really wonderful, but we're not talking about what that salt not being salty meant. And so every pastor has sermons that aren't as good as other sermons. And just know that same, well, hopefully you experience graciousness in person in your congregations about that, but that same kind of graciousness also exists online. There might be 5 or 6 people who say negative things, but then you can delete those comments and they don't exist anymore. And so I just want to encourage people to try and just put stuff out there, and don't let perfect prevent you from doing anything at all.
Well, thank you very much. That is all the time we have today. I want to say thanks to Bishop Megan for being our guest on How We Do Digital Ministry. I want to invite everyone listening to be sure to subscribe and follow our podcast. Bishop Megan, how can our listeners find and follow you online?
You can Google Lutheran Bishop and you'll get me. But you can also go to @MMROHRER, and that's, or just Bishop Megan is probably enough to find me.
All right. Well, thank you much. Thanks again for everybody listening. We want to invite everybody listening to join us in our private Facebook group, cleverly titled How We Do Digital Ministry. The link is in the show notes. It's a good place for you to join other colleagues and discuss all things digital ministry in the other 6 days of the week when you don't have a new podcast episode. Until next week, peace and blessings to you all.